today. And now, introducing our speaker, Jared Williams, who is the co-founder of Future Fruits. Future Fruits is a cooperative whose aim is to put people in control of their community's food needs within their neighborhood through education and artistic and cultural expression. Through the use of permaculture, Future Fruits supports pollinator and wildlife habitat, increases water retention, and builds healthy soil. In this presentation, as you know, Jared will talk about turning public spaces into edible ones, which are sometimes food forests. Thanks, Jared. Over to you.
Hey, everyone. How are you doing? I hope that you're doing well tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited to give this presentation for you all and hopefully get you excited about activating public spaces to grow food and private spaces too. I will go ahead and share my screen with you and we'll start the presentation. Welcome everyone. I'm happy to talk about this topic. I'm very passionate about it. And so I beg to ask a question of us that we take a deep breath and exhale as well and just focus in, because I'm about to give you a lot of information that you may or may not know, and I'm excited to go for it. So without further ado, let's go. All right, so in this talk, we're going to talk about envisioning the future of us activating public spaces and private spaces to grow food. And these are some of the topics we'll talk about. We'll start by observing some standard land use. What does it look like on our landscapes in general, and how we can really witness ourselves as part of that. Also, we'll talk about the historical reasons maybe of why that came to be, of the landscapes that we're going to point out, followed by some worldwide examples of really awesome projects that are activating public spaces, and how we can then go about doing that locally in this Hudson Valley region, or wherever you may be from actually. And you might even be from some places that I might talk about in the examples of worldwide examples. And then finally wrapping up, kind of what does it mean for us? How can we move forward with these ideas and really begin to do the work? All right, so let's jump in. All right, so let's start this first part. I'm going to take you through a little tour of some places that I visited and seen, and give some examples of observations on how we're stewarding land. All right, so here we go. First off is the parks. In general, when I go to parks, I see a lot of open landscape. Much of it is grass, some trees on the edges, and there's generally monuments or some kind of fountain, yeah, it's generally a wide open space where people can do as they please. So that's an observation of parks. Also, I would put into note that it's generally maintained by a city, and not by private landowners. Okay, so the front of businesses, this is how generally they look when I pass by. These little installations of plantings that are evergreen plants, or mulched areas that are tucked towards the building, and they're these general little what I call gumdrops and lollipops designs, where it's these tiny little bushes that don't produce food, and they generally don't get big to block windows. So that's just an observation, what happens in front of businesses with landscaping. And also in front of homes, I see a lot of similar things here in front of a couple of these houses. Evergreen shrubs in the front, and some in the median between the sidewalk and them is grass, or in the side of the house also is a lot of grass, or trees in the backyard as well. Most of it, from what I see, is not growing food and not creating necessarily space for wildlife habitat to exist. So I'm just taking note of some of those things. Also, yeah, this really new thing that's been happening across, especially our state in New York, is the rail trails, which are really great activity builders and allow people to transit between places. Some people really use it as a mode of transportation to get to their food source, grocery stores or whatever. So and it's a passing by, so like you end up seeing people rather than passing by in cars. But again, the vegetation here is largely just whatever is growing, or it is maintained by city or parks department. And so again, it's a big maintenance. Okay. So also a lot of times I see that there's fences, which brings up a whole different issue of accessibility. And when I come onto places like this, I don't feel welcome, like I can walk into them or ask someone if they'd be interested in growing food here. And so this is just another part of observation of private land ownership and how it's viewed from people on the outside. And then there's also land ownership that's not necessarily in the city, but also in the suburbs and in rural areas, where we see a lot of the same, where it's grass and ornamental trees, and houses and pools and kind of a way of living that is not necessarily based in growing food. So I'm just pointing these out, not to point fingers, but to just kind of show a gamut of how there's a lot of spaces that are available to grow food but are not. Okay. So with that being said, I'd like to go into a little bit of historical relevance about how or why this may have happened. And I hope not to offend anyone, but it's just the way history as I know it is. So let's get started with that. All right, I'd first like to acknowledge that the land where I live on is a habitat that was once inhabited by Munsee and Lenape peoples. And I started here because I feel like it's also worth bringing up that is initially how people lived in villages and close communities where they were working together to sustain themselves. So they may have built buildings or planted plantings in an agrarian society, or hunted and fished to sustain themselves, but also they had a sense of pride in where they were and a knowledge of the seasons and the forests. They came together to help each other plant food across the world. That's how it was. It was like, we need to live, so let's all work together regardless of abilities or skills. It needs to be planted, so let's work together and also come back together and harvest it and process it and cook with it and survive the seasons and the changes and the people coming and going and really have a community. So that's something that I really feel is super valid even today. And there's largely examples of that still in existence. But I do want to talk about the other side of it as well, where with colonization of this land in the United States came a symbol of image and status, which kind of trickled out to some of those first images that we went through of large open spaces, big buildings, and that meant you had a certain status, which was saying like, I'm even more powerful than nature is. And look, here's what I can do. And so that symbol still exists in parks. And I'm again not pointing fingers, but making observations, connecting history to what is here. Um, and so along with that came the Industrial Revolution, right? And so that produced a lot of things we still use today. And it's gotten us to where we are, including using this internet right now. Um, and so, yeah, we got cars, we were able to do things like create a much larger population and sustain them, because we now have this fossil fuel stuff, which can really get us exponential growth, right? And so this is kind of a landscape that was created because of that. Instead of villages or large cities and communities, it became this massive, massive thing. And so that also meant that we needed to produce food for all those people somehow. So that industrial revolution also brought about industrial agriculture, which did not really exist in places like cities, right? Because there's not much room left there for that to happen. So then by having all of that, it created a separation, a sense of separation that people, when they go to the stores, see all these aisles of food and wow, it's so great. We get pineapples in the winter, but really, there's something going on in the background that is very far away, and it also creates a sense of not knowing how food is actually grown and prepared and harvested. So that does something on a societal level too. Again, I'm just pointing these things out. And we'll come back to how a bunch of us are living within homes and working our jobs and not having much time to even grow food. But living in that same kind of a status way with a lawn and trees, but highly ornamental, just because that's the normal way of living. So anyways, I just wanted to point out all those things in a historical timeline. But for example, this image we're looking at right now is my neighbor, and they're wonderful people. They're totally amazing. I talk to them a decent amount, and I have nothing against them. But I also try and talk to them about this topic. It's like, well, you do all this work so often, like maybe there's another way. So the next slide here is showing you the property where I live. And we practice what's known as permaculture. And there's a combination of two words, or actually three words, which is permanent in agriculture and permanent in culture. So those two things are inseparable, agriculture and culture. But it's kind of thinking in a way of how to activate ourselves to grow more like nature does, rather than fight against it. And what I consider lawns is fighting against nature, keeping it at a baseline growth. So anyways, that's a very small tidbit of permaculture. We could do a whole session about that. But yeah, I'll tell you a couple more things about it in the next slides here. So what you're seeing there in that mandala shape above is a 70-foot food forest. And I'll go through the 7 F's of what a food forest is. So the first one is, food, of course. And these are 7 things that we're looking to produce or have within a food forest. Food, fuel, fiber, as in the ability to make a rope or other useful materials. Fodder, as in feeding animals. Fertilizer, not the chemical kind, of course, but actually using natural ways to give plants and fungus working together to make fertilizer. Fungi, right? Because that's also a network element. And pharmaceuticals. meaning medicine of all different kinds, herbs and fruits and foods. Also, of course, let's add fun because it's so awesome to live closer to nature and really observe it in a beautiful way. And now also like look at the neighbors below, and what do they have really is just fossil fuels. That's what they're using. I mean, I weekly hear these people cutting their lawn and leaf blowing, and they're doing a lot of work for not much return. So again, another observation between the two. So let's look a little closer at the food forest and say, what is a food forest? Well, it's a perennial polyculture of multi-purpose plants made up of guilds. And many of you are probably saying, guilds? All right, what's that? And a guild is a grouping of blank. It could be plants, it could be people, it could be animals, or all the above, which work together to help ensure the health and productivity towards a common goal. So there's many things, again, that could ripple out in describing that, and I won't go there because that's a whole nother topic, but I wanted to include a little permaculture knowledge here. All right, so with that being said, let's get to the really fun part, which is the examples, worldwide examples of activating public lands. And this is really awesome. I have some really fun things to look at here. First, we'll start with the Incredible Edible Network. It started originally in Todmorden, England. And this woman, Pam Warhurst, which you may have heard of, she has a beautiful TED Talk, a very funny one too, actually. But they have a vision of creating kind, confident, and connected communities through the power of food. It's very simple. They try to grow food in all different locations within their town. And their motto is, if you eat, you're in. And I just love that because it's like, all right, that means anybody can access this and be a part of it. And so, yeah, let's look at them a little closer, actually. So Pam will talk frequently about having 3 plates, right? So if it's working well, it's spinning 3 plates at the same time. One is the learning, the education, the awareness, right, about why it is a good idea to grow food. The next is community, like how are people working together and using skills to be the best that they can be within that. And then creating business, like how is this economically savvy in a world in which we live in? And if it's working well, then all 3 of these things are benefiting each other. So this began like in a really small way with 4 people. They were just volunteering. They started making gardens in many various places. They even had chickens and an egg map where you could see where people grew raised chickens and had eggs available. And it became this complex, like eventual organization that was grant funded, community sponsored, and created tourism. People wanted to see like, how is this happening? How are you all growing food like within your town? And it's working so well. And look at this map here, within almost 10 years, right? 2008 until 2017, when I grabbed this image, was what I guess it's over 50 groups, right? 50 towns kind of took on the model and are doing this in some form in 4 different countries. And that's just in one place, right? So let's keep going. There's many more examples. All right, public produce in this town of Kamloops, British Columbia, right? I love that name, by the way. Public produce sounds good. And they're doing a lot of the similar stuff, right? They're saying, oh, here's an alleyway. Let's put raised beds in and start growing vertically up the walls. Like, why not? It's better than just an alleyway, isn't it? Also, take a look at that left illustration on the bottom left. It's a nursing home where they're saying, all right, we're going to put in something here instead of grass to come up the stairs. Let's make it edible. The image to the right of that is right outside of a laundromat. There's squash growing, and also ornamental things, but medicines. So again, all of this is to promote cooperation, food security, social equity, community, and create an awareness, an overall awareness of people as they pass by these places like, wow, that's interesting. One thing I love about these folks is they are very open about how they created it. So they have a startup guide. If you're interested in this, in creating something similar where you live, like please go get this document. It's really detailed and amazing. And they're also sponsored by local organizations who believe in that work. Let's keep going, many more examples. Portland, Oregon. There's this organization which I recently found called Portland Fruit Tree Project. And I'm just like heartstruck about this. It's amazing. Their mission, increasing equitable access to healthy food and strengthening communities by empowering neighbors to share in the harvest and care of city-grown produce. They promote food justice, they prevent food waste, and they strengthen community. All sounds good, right? They even have these things in the lower right, these little downloads that you can get where you can print it out and laminate it and hang it on a fruit tree if you have one, and say, help yourself to the fruit on this tree. I would love to do that. So this is some of the impact they have, right? The value of the food that they've distributed to organizations, the pounds of fruit harvested, the volunteers that they work with. Look at that. That's a lot of people that are into this in Portland, just Portland. The trees harvested, a lot of trees. Harvesting events that were coordinated and community orchards that are co-created. Like, that is brilliant. I want to do that. So one thing that I wanted to talk about for a hot second is how they make their awareness of the public say, okay, I have an apple tree and I haven't harvested it in years, or I have an abundance and I want to share it. How can you do that? And so they have this document here where it says, like, which asks questions and allows you to say yes or no, and then what you can do to activate your space to be a part of a network that shares fruit. I'm going to keep going. Oh, and they're also backed by a lot of local connections in their town in Portland, where they're donating to churches and they have senior centers, right? So, and the schools, of course, activating the education part. So all good stuff. Here's another angle of it. This guy, Ron Finley, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's getting quite famous, and he's from Los Angeles, California. He begged to ask this question. I mean, he lives in a place that's in a food desert, and he's saying, like, look, there's 26.5 million Americans that live in a food desert. What are we doing about it? Oh, food is the problem, but it's also the solution. We can make it be the solution. So we can activate these spaces. So in South Central LA, there's known for being places like in the top left. And he's basically saying, why don't we change that? Like, let's just start. For example, that middle image there with the hydrant, and then the other side is a before and after of how a space can be activated. This is a median in between home and the street, which the city owns, but the people have to take care of. So Ron Finley was like, hey, I'm gonna grow food there and share it with people. And that's why it's there. So that people walk by and they can share it, they can have it a turn with that food. Like, awesome. Anyways, he's got a fantastic TED Talk too, and you should watch that. Baltimore Guerrilla Gardens. They do this really cool thing where they're creating maps that show like the economics, the social status of places, how many people live in areas, also where is a fruit tree, right there and right there. Who's stewarding that land, and what organization could you join? Let's keep skipping through this. Yeah, and also, like, there's places that are available that are saying, look, there's all these lots where they were gonna build buildings, but they're not anymore. Like, how can we activate those spaces? Like, let's turn them into gardens. Do you want one? Sure, click on it. And let's talk about starting it. So that's really cool. That's like a technological interactive way to get people involved, right? And also a way for cities to say, like, wow, the people care about this. So there's other examples of that happening, of fruit mapping. Community Patchwork Orchard in the UK is doing it. Falling Fruits is something really cool. It's actually open source, and you can go on to that website and say, I found a fruit tree in the middle of a park and people don't know about it. Let's put it on Falling Fruit map, and actually do that by creating an account and putting it on there. Oops, sorry. Okay, this is my good friend here, Felix Lufkin, and he lives in Northampton, Massachusetts. He created an organization called Help Yourself Northampton. And he's talking about the same thing and doing it. He's been doing it for almost probably 10 years now, where he's activating these ignored, unused spaces, transforming them to delicious, productive food gardens, forest gardens, low maintenance and high productivity, creating opportunities for meaningful connections between the shared commons and community to come together for abundance. Yes. They're a 501c3, and so they get donations for their project. And it's just beautiful. I love their work, and I visited many of their sites. Very inspirational. Check them out, especially if you live close. Another good friend of mine started this permaculture exchange in New York City, where, you know, a dense area. There's this dog park in that before picture, which was really unused and actually was derelict. There was a lot of people that were scared to even go in the space, and they got permission to go in and change it and really create a community oasis. So they used permaculture and cultural awareness. So there was people from all over the world in that block, and so they were bringing seeds from their homeland and planting them and sharing and cooking. So just another beautiful example, right, of activating public land. So, whew, yeah, that was a lot, but they're all super inspirational, and there's many more. So I just wanted to show that to show you that it's possible. I'm not this, like, I don't have this wild idea. It's possible. It's happening. The world is changing. It's inspirational, and we can do it too. We should be. So let's talk about it. How can we do it locally? Activating public lands to grow food locally. How do we do this? Let's start by defining public land. So here's a couple definitions. Land that's owned and taken care of by the government. Another definition, land owned by the federal government, the state, or a political subdivision of the state. All right, so that talks about ownership. Who owns public land? They do, right? And this last definition says refers to the public domain, unappropriated land belonging to the government that's subject to sale or other disposal and is not reserved for any particular government or public purpose. So that is interesting. When I looked that up, I said, wow, really? Is that like the definitions? Because what I thought is that we pay taxes and this public land is actually partially like something that we have a say in, but it seems to not be. So let's look at a different word, which I love this word, the commons. And you may have heard of it before, but it's essentially something to talk about public land, but in a different way. Let's look at some definitions here. Land or resources belonging to or affecting the whole of a community. Okay. Also another definition, cultural and natural resources accessible to all members of society, including natural materials such as air, water, and habitable earth. These resources are held in common and not owned privately. So that's interesting, isn't it? Um, hmm. The difference between a government-owned private land and not owned the commons land is like, huh, that's an interesting playing ground. So this third definition here says natural resources that groups of people, being communities or user groups, manage for individual and collective benefit. And I just love that definition because that says a lot. It says groups of people, right, communities, come together to manage for their own good and also the collective good. And that sounds like something of the original slides where I was talking about historically how we've lived on this earth in villages and communities locally. If you want to see more about the commons, I put a note there about David Bollier. He's got a fantastic wealth of knowledge that you should look into, and it'll get you up to speed on that topic. All right. So let's look at this landscape. Where are we? Where am I actually? Because I don't know where people are coming in from here on the internet, but I'm in the Hudson Valley. And so this Hudson Valley region is a beautiful region. It's just chock full of life. There's a lot of water, even in these climate changing circumstances. There's a lot of even excess water. Yeah, there's just a lot of ability here to grow. It's fertile land, especially near the river valleys. And specifically in Kingston, here's an aerial view of this land where the Rondout is coming into the Hudson River. And there's just a wealth of community here. I mean, this is a beautiful place, and I'll talk about it more in detail after. But don't forget that a lot of the landscape looks like this still. Grass, not productive for food. And that's what we're talking about here, is activating public land to grow food, and private land too. Okay, so in some research that I've done, I've discovered that Kingston has a comprehensive plan in effect for the year 2025, things that they hope to accomplish by that year. Also, they have a project called the Broadway Streetscape Project. They're trying to redo Broadway. They're actually in the process of doing it now to accommodate people more, bikes more instead of just cars, a car-oriented place. And that includes plantings. So I'm very interested in that, of course. Also, another plan is an open space plan, City of Kingston, where they're thinking about preserving and having these open spaces for people to access. Sounds also interesting. How could that be activated maybe in a healthy, sustainable way? And they have also an urban agriculture plan and a zoning study. So that's like a whole chunk of information. And if you're interested in that, I have a lot of documents on the Future Fruits Google Drive that you'd be probably interested in. So if you want, contact me after this and I can give you access. So one snippet of this I'd like to talk about for a minute is the 10-minute walk concept. And they've done some analysis about the populations of people that live in certain areas and how much access do they have to quality food, actually. So this is right up my alley. Like, okay, so that's great information. How much access do people have in the Rondout or in Uptown or in Midtown, right? And then how can we be a part of creating an educational experience that says, like, this is food for you available to you with this landscape? So those two things together, many documents together, right? I put them side by side, said, okay, Kingston, here's your goals, and here's how Future Fruits can help. And so with those things, it shows an alignment, and now we can talk about making something happen. So this is all in the process, and I'm very excited about it. But let's keep talking about the analysis, right? Like when you're starting something, it's really important to know what already exists. So doing the research of who's around, like what local organizations are also doing good work. Kingston is full of amazing, amazing organizations. Kingston Land Trust, Live Well Kingston, People's Place, the list goes on. I mean, these organizations that are just a fraction really of organizations doing great work in Kingston and the surrounding area is just an incredible wealth of knowledge and opportunity. So that being said, I approached the Kingston Land Trust and said, you know, let's maybe work together, and we are, because their mission is the creative use of publicly accessible space. They already have in existence a greening group, which identifies spaces that can be used for installing green projects. They have a land bank, which is gathering knowledge about what land is available for public group land stewardship. And they're part of the urban agriculture zoning legality. And one thing that I really love about the Kingston Land Trust is they have this thing called the land matching portal, which is an initiative to match up people who want to grow food but don't have land with people who have land and may be growing or may not necessarily be able to or want to grow, and linking up those two things so that people can work together to grow food. So awesome stuff. For example, this is something that I was talking to them about last year. It's an existing place in the Rondout, which is actually a community garden in existence already. Let's look at it. So here's an aerial view. You can see in the center there, it's kind of triangular trapezoid shape. And what's surrounding it? Let's look. It's got affordable housing units, a school nearby, a church. The rail trail runs right past it. There's basketball courts. There's like a couple picnic tables. So I looked at it in the middle of this last winter and I was like, wow, but there's still a lot of space here. And I think there could be like a food forest, edible landscape here. So I was looking at some of the community structure and what was existing. There's already trees and some raspberries and everything here. And I just went ahead and thought about a design, like what could this look like? It's just one example, right? But how could this place be upgraded even? Like in that spare space, some upgrades could be 17 trees, 21 shrubs, the existing community garden, with more people from the surrounding affordable housing in there, right? Grape and kiwi arbors for people to sit underneath. There's water there already. There's you could have herbs and spices and medicine and edible ground covers. I mean, this could be like an oasis of food production, and it just would take some input from the community. So here's a list of like practicality. I won't spend too long, but also just thinking about the human resources, the natural resources, and the physical resources. What are some things that would be needed to really make this happen? And you can quickly see that the human resources is something that is actually one of the bigger parts of this. People should be really into the project. So creating awareness is really important too. All right, so that's like activating public lands, and there's many ways that can happen, not just what I just showed you, right? I'm gonna take a break for a little bit of water. Thank you, water. And talk about activating private lands as well to grow food locally. So something also I'm interested in is utilizing what we already have, which is some people owning land and spaces in between the house and the sidewalk, or their own acres and acres of property. How can we create a network which works together to grow food? So let's look at some definitions right off the bat of private land. What does that mean? Oh, well, one dictionary says land that's not owned by the government. Okay. Yes, it's privately owned land. Um, Also could be land or buildings. So that puts a cultural piece into it as well, that belongs to a particular person or even company rather than to the government. Okay. And this last one I find interesting, land owned by a person or group and kept for their exclusive use. And that kind of says something to me, where especially the word exclusive, it goes back to that image of the pattern of separation, where everybody has their own and their own status and symbol of grass lawn that's exclusively theirs and not anybody else's. So yeah, I beg to challenge that too. Like, how can we utilize private land in a shared way? So I have some questions um, and thoughts. Uh, I'll take a break between these. So I'd like to ask you all this. Can we create a sharing network amongst private landowners? If given the support, will private landowners allow their land to be used communally? And lastly, can we negotiate with neighbors to activate shared lands for our collective sustenance? So that's that's a couple quick questions that allow us to begin to have a conversation about really coming together and sharing the work, sharing the land, sharing the food, and making this a better place, not just for humans, but also for animals and soil and retaining water. The list goes on and on and on. All right, I'm going to show you some examples that I've been a part of. This is a food forest, and someone contacted me and said, "Hey, I've got a lawn in my backyard, and I'm so tired of mowing it." And I hear this all the time now that I've put this idea out there. And they say, "Can you come and help me?" And I say, "Yeah, I'd love to. Like, let's talk about it." And this is one example of that. So what used to be a backyard, let's turn it into a food forest. We're growing all kinds of things you can see there. You may or may not know what they are. Some strange ones too, goomy berries. Um, yeah. So, uh, anyways, long story short, let's keep going. This is the way it could look like in maybe 5 or 10 years, right? Their backyard that used to be just lawn is now producing a lot of food and medicine. So we started to install it with my little sidekick, my son there, Rio, and my housemate, Michaela. They're both amazing people, and we had a great time installing this, building soil so that this installation can grow into the future. And they're so excited to share this with their neighbors in the suburbs. Um, Here's another lawn that got transformed, turning that from a blank canvas into a food producer. So added a whole bunch of blueberries. I think this is 20 different blueberries, which are gonna also be planted with other ground covers. And that can turn into beautiful things like this on the right, where we have a permaculture guild. This is a persimmon with currants, horseradish, and lemon balm, and ground covers of strawberries. So I mean, this is like in just 10 feet, you've got a whole ton of produce there. Um, I'm just going to run through the ending here. We're trying to build soil, create habitat for that to happen. We're trying to create networks of mycelium, networks of people, networks of resources and sharing and abundance, and even for animals. Oh, not deer though. Also, habitats for the um, insect pollinators. I mean, we wouldn't be anywhere without those little creatures. They create so much food, they do a lot of work. So, thinking about also, this is not just about human beings. This is about nature and giving back to it, because that's, without it, we would not be here. And because that's all happening, there's an abundance created. And so now I have this problem of too much baby plants popping up everywhere. What am I going to do? Oh no, problem. Most people would be like, oh, take them out, weed whack them, I don't know, cut them down. No, I'm going to pot them up and share them. So now we have this nursery that we can bring to other private lands, other public lands, and really start spreading food that's accessible. Here's a pawpaw tree started from seed. It takes 7 or 8 years to really get to what you see on the right-hand side. I just took that picture last week, and it creates food, abundant food source. I mean, that's a miracle. That's beautiful. I love being a part of that, and shouldn't we all? So here's an example of some of the fruits that we can get. Some are noticeable, others aren't. Top left is Coosa dogwood. It's a very interesting flavor and texture. Bottom left is a pawpaw, the most brilliant fruit that I've ever had in my life, growing in this Northeast region. Apples, of course, peaches, tomatoes, even annual crops, right? Parsnips, medicine of medicinal plants, right? So there's echinacea and bee balm. The list goes on and on and on of possibilities. And it's not just food. Again, it's about the people coming together and sharing their stories, and really coming together around like, oh, I need help with this. I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, well, you do, and you've got a whole list of people behind you who do too. So like, let's work together and make it really happen. And that's the golden magic piece of coming back to village and really local awareness, and starting to activate our lands to grow food together. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and that you can go on and create connection and abundance locally with you and your neighbors, wherever you may be. And I encourage you to save seeds and start planting future fruits. There's a really old Chinese proverb that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. So, I mean, we have the ability and the power to really start doing it. And so if you're interested and you want to be a part of what I'm doing, or you want to just download some knowledge, I'm totally available. I love sharing and connecting with people about this. So if you want to, I'm throwing it out to the internet. Please contact me by email, even by phone. No spam, please. And that on the bottom there is the Instagram page, where you can keep up to date with what's happening with Future Fruits. So with that being said, I'm all done. And if you have any questions, I'd love to stick around and answer them. I haven't been able to see any. I've just been giving this presentation. So let's go. I'm ready.
We have a couple of questions that came in the chat box, so we can start with those.
Okay.
One is there, this is from Sue, is there any kind of stigma attached to people who actually take advantage of the fruits and vegetables growing in public spaces?
Oh, that's such a great question, because yeah, it's because of what we went through with the historical thing. It's very normal that it's taboo. Like, don't touch my private space. Like, and that, you know, you see private property signs all over the place. It's a touchy issue, yes. And so like if you are going to approach a place, you should probably do so kindly and then ask permission. And especially if you see signs like that one organization, the Portland Fruit Tree Project, that say help yourself, like, or a Future Fruits like flag somewhere that will give you an indication that like this is accessible to people. Yeah, but that is something to really pay attention to, is the permissions and the ability to access a space. Yeah, and I'm really passionate about that. I hope that the work that I do kind of challenges that status quo and allows us to come together around food more.
Mm-hmm. And then another question, how do you, like, just practically speaking, get water to some of these places that might not have an outlet?
Yeah, so that's a great question too, because water is a very big issue of this climate change, right? And like I said, it's sometimes in abundance, although we've seen the heavy droughts here too. So great question. And permaculture and indigenous knowledge and, you know, many various ways to look at this, has lots of ways to retain moisture better. And the number one thing is to build soil. So a lot of places that we live in, the soil has been damaged or stripped from its nutrition, and it's compacted. And so water will generally like hit it and leave. It goes downhill like to the rivers quicker, right? So knowing that, like, we can help deal with the soil, building the soil and adding mulch and things that retain moisture for longer periods.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a way to help. But yes, water on site is a fantastic luxury to have. Some places do, especially home owners places. But yeah, when it comes to public land, that is something of definite concern. So yeah, it takes that's a question to ask of the specific place. But yeah, thank you for that question.
Mm-hmm. We have another one from Emily, who says, how do you transcend the reluctance to plant fruit trees when they're often perceived as a mess and hard to maintain?
Thank you. Yes. I love these questions. They're right on. I get them all the time, because that is a thing that happens, especially with government. They for example, like the city of Kingston, when I approach them about it, they're often asking me that question. Well, how's it going to get maintained, and what's the liability, right? Those are the two main things. And the maintenance is something, but it's often seen as a mess, right? But if there's a education around it, if there's an awareness around it, and people are actually saying, I would love to take care of this tree, right? And there's a group of people, it's not just one person who, if they get sick, can't harvest a tree, right? It's like setting up things to be more resilient in terms of care, and the awareness being there. So like, for example, I love going into Kingston and the people's places that I know have these foods, and personally I love it, and I think a bunch of you probably do too who are here, to go into these places and say like, oh wow, like it's autumn and it's time to take care of apples. Let's go check out all the apple places. Wouldn't that be fun? Like, come on, son, let's go and have a good time, like harvesting fruit and taking care of these spaces. Like, I would do that for the rest of my life. And I hope to find people who want to also do the same.
One more. When you were talking about public land and commons, are lands designated as one or another? How do you know what it is?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one of those questions that's also very specific, right? Because there's land ownership somewhere, and so it's whether it's been written into stone that it's a common space or not. And that is on the verge of really changing. I mean, a lot of cities are waking up and saying like, yeah, this is actually for the people, right? This country that's established like for the people, by the people, right? This should be accessible to them and not something that's held in a government only way. So they should be able to have a say in how it works. Like, maybe we should hold city-based workshops and get the people's input. Like, for example, Kingston is having for the next few months, they're doing an arts committee that's saying, how do the people of the city feel about art in this region? Like, how do we activate the spaces with art too? And so that's one example. Also, I'm excited about with Future Fruits is activating these spaces, not only for planting, but also for creating culture. And that is hugely based in art. And so, yeah, it's kind of a tricky question because it's like, who owns the land? The government. And then, okay, how do we activate that to become more of a common space? And it is a job of us too. You know, we are a part of this.
Are there any other questions out there? You can unmute yourselves. No. Well, thank you so much, Jared. That was just it was fascinating and gave think about. There's so much creativity there.
Yeah, my pleasure. Again, it's a passion of mine, and I would love to talk to each and every one of you about it. Something also I do as a side note is permaculture design courses, where you can learn a lot about the theory, a lot more about the theories that I talked about in the middle of the presentation. So you can reach out to me about that as well.
Great. And thanks to Morton Library for co-sponsoring with us. And thanks to all of you who came. Nashville, Knoxville, Seattle, Hudson Valley, great group.
Yeah.
Just a heads up, that backyard to table is transitioning. And although we'll still be offering the same services, we'll be tucked under the umbrella of Dirty Gaia, which is very exciting. It's a new entity. Why Dirty Gaia, you ask? Because Gaia is the ancient Greek's name for Mother Nature, and dirt is the foundation of everything. So we also wanted to be a little sassy. So stay tuned for more on that. Follow us at Backyard to Table Rhinecliff on Instagram, backyardtotable.org on Facebook, and at Morton Rhinecliff for the library. Thanks so much again. We'll see you at the next one, which is a talk on biomimicry, using nature's ideas to solve human design problems with Dorna Schroeder. Really looking forward to that one too. So keep your eyes on your mailbox, and we'll see you soon.